But Boozer was Deacon's brother. He wouldn't let him do this, at least not alone. Deacon downed the contents of a whiskey bottle and told Boozer that if he was going to kill himself with drink, then Deacon was going to do it too, because that's what brothers do. He would join him in his final ride. Well, Boozer had to stop. He had to stop what he was doing for Deacon. It wasn't just his own well-being on the line anymore. Boozer began sobering up and writing again, but the grief of losing his Joni, it never left. He had the mongrels, he had Deacon, and it was just enough to pull him through. But don't think that this was a group of well-meaning, heart-of-gold, gallivanting gentlemen intent on preserving all that's wondrous and pure within the world. They dealt in drugs, had turf wars, assaulted competitors in their weed-growing business, and regularly had to dodge run-ins with the law. They were rough and tumble, even against their own, should rules be broken. For example, a young buck within the Mongrel Motorcycle Club called Jesse Williamson did something unforgivable. He killed another member of the Mongrels. And this wasn't something that could just be covered up or forgotten. It was unforgivable. Jesse Williamson was brought in and stripped of his rank within the Mongrels MC. He had to go, except he had a massive tattoo on his back of the club's emblem. It had to go. Deacon and Boozer held Jesse Williamson down as old Jack used a blowtorch to burn the tattoo off his back before sending him off into the world to suffer his wound and starve.
When they left, it appears they may have stolen some automatic
But for a moment,
rifles
moving on to another story that will soon intertwine with Deacon St. John's. A research facility was established at Iron Butte, a place called Cloverdale. A state-of-the-art, high-tech facility occupied by a number of researchers studying the plant life around the area. It just so happened that a rare mutation of lavender grew in the area, making it the perfect reason to plant the facility there, in the mountains, away from civilization and prying eyes. Cloverdale was protected with on-site security and a system called AIRI, standing for Artificial Intelligence Response Interface. There was a nuclear-powered generator on site and solar arrays on the rooftop to ensure that the power never went down. All of this to study some flowers. Well, one of the young researchers recruited to work here was a woman named Sarah Irene Whitaker. And Sarah would argue to you that this was just big pharma money trying to turn a few extra billions in their favor. High stakes in the world of pharmaceuticals. Some on-site faculty believed this mutation of lavender, for example, could be synthesized into a new way to treat burns. And lovely Sarah Irene Whitaker encountered our outlaw road, Deacon St. John, by happenstance, on a backcountry road where her vehicle broke down en route home one day. And the two had obvious chemistry, despite being very different personalities. Their characters complemented one another. Deacon St. John proved to be a bit of a romantic. Sarah more rough around the edges than you might expect. And as these things sometimes go, the two fell in love, a heart-touching affair, a beautiful wedding. But anyways, for what's to come, it's important to remember that Sarah Irene Whitaker was devastatingly important and beloved by Deacon St. John and by Boozer, who called her his little sister, Boozer, who was also the only person to attend their wedding. Sarah made familial sacrifices to be with Deacon, an accomplished researcher with 2 PhDs marrying a biker gang bad boy. Mom and Dad certainly would not approve, and Deacon even took the title of Nomad within the Mongrel Motorcycle Club, signifying that, while still loyal to and a part of the club, he would not be actively riding with them anymore. His devotions switched to Sarah, not a thrilling prospect to the members of the club, I'm sure, but Deacon is a stubborn guy. He gave up time with them to be with his new wife, to start a new life. Everything was really coming together for Deacon and Sarah, a lovely, beautiful, newlywed couple. But let's return to Cloverdale Research Institute and the work taking place there by Sarah Irene Whitaker and her colleagues. Everyone with their specializations, growing their plant life, collecting their data, running experiments. But, there was this intern that just, you thought it smelled a little funny. A fellow named David Gorman. And young David Gorman told Sarah Whitaker that he thought a great conspiracy was at play here. Things didn't quite add up for him, and Sarah thought that he was just being paranoid. She didn't believe a word that he said. And then, clearance revokes began. The Cloverdale researchers were denied access to their clean room. and communications from company higher-ups all but ceased. So, in secret, research intern David Gorman took matters into his own hands. He hacked through a firewall, downloaded classified information related to the studies taking place at Cloverdale. Then, he broke into the lockdown lab and took samples of something being grown there. But the intern did not abide by clean room standards when removing the samples, and infected himself with whatever was in those test tubes. He didn't get ill right away, no. David Gorman took the samples to Portland, Oregon, where a Green Expo was taking place, probably to meet with a reporter and act as a whistleblower. And the infected David Gorman began spreading the airborne affliction. Within 2 days, it would have spread to an unknowable number of people within that convention, who then got on their planes home and continued to spread it. And this early version of the virus, it had an incubation period of about a week. And once that virus came alive, the world fell apart. The virus killed nearly all children under the age of 12 and adults over the age of 60 when infected. Their immune systems just couldn't handle what was happening. But not all in those age groups died. More on that later. But what did this virus do? Well, it spreads through the lymphatic system. It shuts down or destroys the parts of the human brain that control higher mental functions like judgment and inhibition, as well as most memory associations, written and spoken word comprehension, self-identity, and recognition. It makes the brain primal and devoid of rational thought. What makes us uniquely human goes right out the window. The virus doesn't work like viruses as we know them now, not even like cancer. It doesn't impair organ function, manically reproduce, or cause mass cell death. By activating typically dormant proto-oncogenes, or proteins that stimulate cell division, this virus reprograms the body to prompt intense muscle growth. Fight responses override any potentially remaining rational thought, causing immense physical and mental mutations to commence in a very short amount of time. The young and the aged die en masse because of this extremely rapid physical change. Typically, their bodies just can't handle it, though there are some that do. When cases first began to present, it was the National Emergency Response Organization, or NERO, that spearheaded initial containment. Portland was ground zero, the hardest hit of American major cities. But by the grace of spread-out population centers and difficult terrain, it was not the Pacific Northwest that fell first. Everything east of the Mississippi was overrun. The entirety of the East Coast was lost within just the first week of chaos. Nero took control of military deployments and directives. There was no one else with the apparent know-how to handle the situation. The government crumbled. Nero efforts within Oregon and conditions along the West Coast have been documented as Nero held major facilities and ground offices in the Pacific Northwest. But the rest of the world just had to fend for themselves. Godspeed was up to the wall. In Oregon, major city centers attempted to evacuate as infections spread. But it was like trying to stop wildfire with a water gun. Within Oregon, Nero set up refugee camps, checkpoints along highways to keep infection out, and controlled the extreme amount of civilians trying to reach safety. But what this meant in practice was that those who didn't die in the city centers, meaning a very small percentage of people, met their doom trapped on highways when the infected, violent hordes began to move up the major roads. These roadblocks would stretch back for miles, and every minute of every hour, more infections presented in those who had been exposed in the days prior. Checkpoints and camps were overrun en masse by panicking civilians and hordes of infected breaking through the lines of fire. There just hadn't been enough time to set up viable defenses. No walls, no weaponry. Tunnels, sandbags, and traffic kept people in order, but once the infected arrived and panic began, there was nothing there to stop it. And it didn't take long for the order to come down. Nero personnel were directed to abandon the camps and the roads with no warning to the civilians on the ground. Those who argued with the order or who refused to leave generally met with very gruesome ends. There was no containment to be had, no salvation to be carried out. Safe zones became myths for those who weren't wearing a Nero uniform. Even then, it was far from a guarantee that you could be kept safe from the outside world. 2.5 billion people were estimated dead within the first week. So, hell came to Earth, but we can't carry on stories from the world. In actuality, who knows what became of the lands beyond America? Let's rewind a few days to the sudden outbreak of the virus and focus on one man's story, though it will involve many moving parts. The virus, of course, came to Farewell, Oregon, the home of the newly wedded Deacon St. John and Sarah Irene Whitaker, as well as William Boozer Gray. The night everything imploded at Farewell when the virus flooded the streets, Sarah convinced the deacon, and by extension, Boozer, to take her into the Cloverdale office in town to search for information about that young research intern David Gorman, only for her to discover that he had been missing for 2 weeks. Suspicions began to form, given the news of a viral outbreak causing chaos very suddenly across the states, but Sarah had minutes to mull this information over before the outbreak began. It happened so incredibly fast. Deacon had told her that they needed to stay away from the towns just in case, but no one thought that it would be something like that and that it could happen so quickly. They got caught in the middle of Farewell. Nero troops and employees were taken down into the streets. They would have to fight their own way out. A moment of concern took Sarah when she saw a young girl crying in a corner. She couldn't have known that the girl was infected and already in a state of losing control of her senses. The girl shipped Sarah in the gut, and not the Hollywood kind of stab that the lead character could just heroically shake off and carry on with as though it were nothing. And terrible began, and Oregon was nicked. Sarah was able to carry on
Scrap.
for a while, but each step became more difficult, and it was clear that Sarah was not going to be able to walk out of Farewell. Deacon feared that she was turning septic. A narrow evac was still on a rooftop, and Deacon set his eyes on getting them into it, except the young grad student named O'Brien, overseeing the helicopter, insisted that only 2 of the 3 could go. The doctor was already overweight. It was dangerous to even just take 2 of them, and the only reason he even agreed to that was the gun Deacon put in his face. Boozer was already mildly injured. There was no way that Boozer would leave Deacon on that rooftop. There was no way that Deacon would leave him behind either. Sarah was sent away to the safety of that narrow helicopter, leaving Deacon and Boozer behind. The young
Okay, that should do it.
kept Sarah alive until she could be taken into surgery at a Nero refugee camp. And Deacon and Boozer fought their way out of Farewell, beginning their search for where Sarah was taken.
There we go.
Three-fingered Jack.
Drop it!
What they found was a very
If you had bullets, I wouldn't be breathing now, would I?
corpses infected. It was apparent if anyone had
Please,
seen
mister.
this horror had happened. Deacon and Boozer
I don't shoot women if I have a choice. Do I have a choice?
I ain't got nothing. I got nowhere to go.
Jesus Christ. All right, let's see if they got an underground bunker around here. Bunker, yes. Here it is. Hello, a map. Looks like they marked it up pretty good.
Deke, you there? Probably nothing. Sounded like bike engines, riding somewhere on the mountain.
I just finished clearing the radio tower for Copeland. I'm gonna climb the tower, see if I can see anything.